All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here on a gray Wednesday morning right before Thanksgiving break. Today we're going to be talking about redesigning with purpose, integrating the essential skills. I think the term essential skills is starting to become more familiar with folks. And so this is something that's going to be starting to happen within our gen ed courses. So we wanted to take the opportunity to share some redesigns that we had happen over this past summer. So this past summer, we put out a call for people who wanted to go ahead and start looking at how they could redesign some assignments that they already have within their gen ed courses or some other courses. And so we had several people who did take part in that. And so we did another session that can be provided as well that showed 3 different redesigns, but then we also wanted to have an extra one so we can show you this next set. So today I have with me Dr. Martha Groppo. The clicker, is it me? There you go. Okay, so we have this morning with us Dr. Martha Groppo, the associate professor with the Department of History, Philosophy, and Religious Studies, and she's going to be sharing an assignment redesign that she did for History 101. And then we're going to have, we also have Dr. Barbara Jones, assistant professor with the Department of Agriculture, and she did her redesign assignment for AGR 328. So we are going to allow them to each come up here and present. We will be monitoring the chat room for those who are joining us virtually, and then we will have time for questions as well at the end. So we're going to get started with Martha.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much. I was excited. I don't really know where to look in this room, but I'll look over here. I was excited this summer to have this opportunity for a couple reasons. I guess the first one is because I'm constantly redesigning my assignments. And so I was just talking with Barbara. We were both already in that process over the summer anyway. The second reason is because I'm really intrigued by this idea of essential skills, because as a historian in the history department, I teach students who are from across the university. And so I'm always thinking about ways to make the skills that history has to offer useful in an employable sense to students who maybe aren't majors. And so I like to think about that anyway. So this is kind of a challenge to do that. So the essential skill that I focused on was this applied knowledge, academic knowledge, skills, and abilities, which I think to me sounded like one of the more broad skills and one that's open to interpretation. And so I really thought through what are the actual skills that we work on in History 101, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that class in a second. But the actual skills and abilities that we really want students to be able to apply are sort of twofold. So the first is analysis specifically of primary sources. And so when I talk about primary sources, I mean the sources of evidence that we use to understand the past. So it could be a speech, it could be a painting, it's something produced at the time we're studying. And so we use those as historians as evidence, and we want students to be able to look at that evidence and analyze it. The second is a synthesis of looking at a primary source and being able to contextualize it by also looking at a secondary source. So that's something written by a historian, like a textbook the students might be reading or a history book. And so we want them to be able to apply that knowledge from the textbook to analyzing a primary source. So that's a higher level skill, that's synthesis. And so those are really the two that I wanted to focus on. So the course that I'm talking about is a general education course. It's a small topic, world history since 1500. So most of us choose a theme to kind of specialize and help us go through that content in a more understandable way for students. So me personally, I've chosen monarchs, dictators, and revolutionaries, and we really talk about different forms of power historically, and then challenges to that power. More specifically, we've had a big demand for online asynchronous offerings of this gen ed course. And so I wanted to focus on the assignment for that version of the class, because I think it's different than how I would teach it in person. And two of the learning outcomes for this class are really focused on those skills. And so maybe my redesign is helpful to those who want to have an assignment that not only speaks to an essential skill, but also the learning outcomes for the class. In this case, learning outcomes I've inherited that I'm assigned, I have to cover, and then also assessment. So that's the course, the online asynchronous version I was working on over the summer, of course, because of the transition to Canvas, and that opened new potentials as well. This always fills. I teach 2 sections online. Usually they're always full every semester. And so it's a really important assignment for me. The assignment is also important because it's the only assignment I've ever inherited that I've been told, I have to teach because we use it for assessment. So I'll tell you a little bit about what historically we've done with this assignment. And then this redesign was part of an ongoing process where we're kind of reconsidering this assessment vehicle and thinking about different ways we could do it. So maybe if you're in that process, this might be helpful to you as well. But so the original assignment that we've always used is called the primary source analysis paper. It's a 3 to 4 page paper. And essentially students have to have a primary source that we give them, and they have to analyze basic information from that primary source, like who the audience is, what the perspective seems to be, what it's about, when it was written, etc. So for example, I've assigned before Napoleon's account of his coup, which is written from a very specific perspective, and students have to pull that information out. But then they also had to develop an argument. And one of the things that helped them do that is they had to use support from the primary source, like quote from it, to give evidence for their perspective, and then also use secondary source context. So cite their textbook or whatever secondary source was assigned in the course. So it was important because we have to assign writing in this class. It's part of our departmental guidelines. So it met that requirement for gen ed students. And like I mentioned, it was tied to the learning outcomes for this course, but we also use it as our departmental assessment vehicle for gen ed. So I've not felt like I had a lot of wiggle room with this assignment and have had some frustrations with it. So I'll tell you about those. One is a lot of the papers that students have been producing have really had more summary than argumentation, and they've just kind of reiterated facts. So this source is written by Napoleon and it's account of his coup, and there's not a lot of actual analysis. They're pulling the basic information out. But a lot of that information, especially in an online format, could just be pulled easily from the internet. It's really hard to find primary sources that don't exist in any version online. And so students it wasn't really assessing students' ability to do that analytical work. In addition, of course, with the advent of more and more AI writing, also the words themselves were having more and more problems with originality in the way students were writing the paper. And then I also felt that it was really kind of requiring some skills that weren't the skills that we're focusing on the course, like writing ability, argumentation development. Those are higher level skills that we work on in upper division classes. In a gen ed history survey, we talk about them, but that's not the focus. And so I felt like there was a little bit of a mismatch there, if that makes sense. So the first thing I wanted to do when I came to this redesign was really clarify for myself and make transparent to myself before I could make transparent to students the purpose of the assignment. Why are we doing this? What do we want students to get out of this? And what skills do we want them to be able to use for this assignment? And so I did that first by consulting with our departmental assessment committee just to clarify, what do we actually have to have here? What are the skills, the underlying skills that we really need? And so, of course, that led me to the rubric for the element and looking through what our element is supposed to be doing in general education and really thinking about what those skills that we're trying to assess are. So that was kind of the starting point, and that led me to the primary source analysis and then the synthesis with the secondary source, right? Those are the two things I really need to focus on. And of course, there's other learning outcomes for the class, but for this vehicle, that's what I really needed. But then I wanted to think a little bit more creatively and try to bring a little bit more of my passion for my profession into this process as well. and think about what the actual relationship between those skills we want students to develop and what I actually do in my job, what my employability skills as a historian actually are. And so I really thought about how what we're asking students to do simulates what I do. So I study a period, I look at the secondary sources and immerse myself in the period of my specialty. Then I go to the archives. So here's a picture of me on a research trip in Newfoundland, where they bring out the actual documents and I look at the sources. And then I synthesize it. I use what I know about the period and what I found, and I analyze it. And that's what we're trying to kind of simulate for students. And I'll note, if you're not going to be a historian, with the vast majority of our students aren't going to be, I still think this is a useful process, right? Studying, encountering something you're not familiar with, and then using what you know to analyze what you encounter. So I thought, how can I kind of simulate that process in a more organic way? That way students don't just take paper and panic. So I looked at Canvas next, of course, over the summer to just see what it could do. I don't think timed examinations are perfect, but there's a lot that's not perfect about teaching online asynchronously. And this is a format that the students are used to. So after each module, they have a timed examination. I give them like 4 hours, like it's a very long time, but there is kind of a limit on it. And so what I decided to do was to develop a final exam where they would encounter these primary sources and need to write about them. But first, I wanted to develop an entire final module for the class, the final week of the class, where the whole purpose of the module is to really make the purpose of the assignment transparent to students. And so I do that. These are some screenshots from like a recorded presentation that walks them through it. You can see, why are we doing this again? We talk a lot about what are the skills that we're trying to practice here. I remind them what primary sources are. We talk about secondary sources. I think I maybe have another one. Yeah, the assignment purpose, right? And then I show it visually and then we talk through it. And then we go through the tasks in the same way, like exactly what they can expect on the test. I let them know what time period that we've already studied it's going to be about. Say it's going to be about Vichy France, which is a very narrow 3 to 4 year time period, but that I'm not going to tell them what the primary sources are in advance or who wrote them or delivered them. And so they'll have to interpret that in the moment. And then I give them a set of secondary sources to read, to prepare. These are like Smithsonian articles, like short online articles. And then I give them a full rubric. And so that's kind of the module that I developed. The video instructions have embedded quiz questions that are graded. That way there's an incentive to actually complete the assignment, because one issue that sometimes happens with online asynchronous is students just kind of rolling the dice and diving into a test and seeing how they can do. And so for this final assignment, I really wanted to signal that it's not a bunch of multiple choice questions. It's something different. Here's exactly what you can expect. So I tell students in this video explanation that what they're going to get to do in this final challenge, as I phrase it, is apply skills that they've developed and really get to try to be the historian by simulating that historian's process. So they're going to prepare for a trip to the archives by studying these secondary sources on Vichy France I've provided them, and then go to the archives by opening the timed examination and seeing what primary sources they encounter there. And then they'll answer questions to analyze those primary sources. And so you can see, just to kind of help students grade-wise, some of the questions are multiple choice and they just require a kind of straightforward answer that you listened to this. This is a radio broadcast by Charles de Gaulle. They listened to it and then they answer the question, right? There's one right answer to that question. Same thing with the speech that I have a different speech that's by Philippe Pétain, and they have to answer some factual questions. And then a piece of visual propaganda as well. But then the part that we're going to use in assessment are the essay questions, and there's some essay questions as well that really focus on that analysis of the primary source and the synthesis. So they have to formulate answers and give their own opinion, their own interpretation, their own analysis and synthesis of what those sources tell us about the past. So I think I included examples here. So you can see here that the question is going to ask them to do 300 to 400 words, which if you're like me and that's hard to estimate, it's a robust paragraph essentially. But it's more targeted than the paper was, which used to have a lot of kind of filler from students, from the dawn of time, kind of introductory paragraph, and then finally get to the work that we were actually trying to assess. So you can see here the first question is, the question 4 there is an analysis question. So they have to read part of this excerpt from this speech and say what are some of the problems that France is facing at the time, and who or what does he seem to be blaming for those problems? And those are analytical questions that they have to be able to answer from reading the source and reading the speech. And you can see, although the instructions talked through how to quote from the primary source and include that evidence, there's also reminders on the test itself. And then the final question is kind of the most complex, but again, they've seen these instructions before. Final essay is intended to assess your ability to interpret a primary source and use a secondary source to contextualize it. And so this question asks them to essentially take a stance and assess Philippe Pétain, who probably a lot of folks don't know, but he was a very controversial World War II leader who some have interpreted as sort of a hero of France who gets them through occupation, and then others as a dictator who collaborates with the Nazis. And so in this second assignment, they have to include information from both the secondary sources, and I remind them what those are, and the primary source. So kind of encouraging that synthetic work. So that's what I came up with. This rubric is probably too small to look at, but just trust me that it exists and that students are walked through it. And we talk about, you can see analysis and synthesis are on there. Also authenticity, just to remind them that for this course and this essay question, the writing and the thinking needs to be, and the editing needs to be their own. So as far as how I'm going to try to figure out if this worked, this is my first semester using this new assignment. So they're starting their module next week. One thing I'm hoping for is an improved pass rate, because especially once we had AI really start entering the grading world more in fall 2024 is really when I noticed it the most. I had a lot of students who just had no authenticity that I could really identify at all, or almost identical essays across multiple submissions. And so this was what it wasn't intended to be, which was a grade busting final assignment. And that's not what it's intended to be. It's intended to be something that gives students the chance to apply what they've learned, right? And so I'm hoping for an improved pass rate. So that's one kind of concrete metric that I'm going to be looking at. Also a question added to the final course evaluations about this particular assignment and whether they felt that they were prepared and it matched what we went over in class. I'm also curious to see if it has an impact on departmental assessment. Historically, we've had really good numbers with this assignment, but I was kind of anticipating that changing, and our random approach of selecting assessment vehicles maybe becoming more problematic now that we do have issues with originality becoming more of a problem. So I'm curious to see how this will impact departmental assessment. And I'm also kind of engaged in ongoing conversations about what different assessment organs we can use to replace the final source analysis paper if faculty do indeed want to replace it, which they don't have to. So those are a few things that I'm going to use to assess as far as what I like about the new one. I think that it's more strongly and transparently correlated to the skills that we actually hope students will develop in the course and that are in those learning outcomes. And so it feels like a stronger correlation to me. Not that the old assignment entirely ignores these skills, but I think sometimes students in their minds really foregrounded other skills like argumentation or writing. It also reflects a major emphasis of the course, which is that primary sources come in different forms Because this is a test, I can have different primary sources. I'm not asking them to analyze one speech, for example. They can kind of encounter some different ones in there. And I think that simulates more like the archival experience. I do think it'll be easier to grade and assess as well, because we're really targeting those skills into essays, less correlated with writing ability. And like I've mentioned, it kind of more accurately simulates what I actually do in my job. Lingering concerns, it's a test, right? That's not the most creative or assignment kind, exciting kind of assignment. I've had instructional designers suggest trying a lockdown browser. I haven't done that yet. It kind of makes me nervous. So maybe that's in the future. I don't know. Maybe I'm scared for no reason of that. So of course it's still totally cheatable if students want to do that. But so I do have some lingering concerns. But in general, I'm hopeful and looking forward to seeing what students more importantly make of the assignment this semester, and see if they feel a little bit more confident and more successful with this assignment and the skills that they've mastered during the semester.
Does anybody have any questions on this assignment redesign?
Will you, if this goes to how you think it will go in this is final module, will you transfer this over to other classes that you teach as well, or is this only applicable to this?
I think it depends on the final, like, I think I'm teaching an honors class where there is a large final assignment. And I think assignments where there's kind of a higher stakes one, it might make sense to having that structure that leads students in. And then I'm teaching an upper division semester, a class this semester, where I did end up walking students through the directions for the assignment in video form on Canvas. I didn't add the quiz questions, but students liked that. So I do think, for whatever reason, accompanying your written instructions with a video explanation, and then of course doing in class too, but you know, I don't see these students face to face. So I think having something they can go back to might be useful. It wasn't that difficult to do. It's very awkward seeing yourself on video, but if you can get past that.
Yeah, you just gotta forget it. Yeah.
Very uncomfortable.
The spotlight effect, I guess. I guess this isn't really a question, but first of all, I like the way that you framed when you're talking about the original assignment and challenges with it, where you have a lack of originality or a lack of analysis. It's more just a book report that they're submitting. I think it's really easy to just say, well, students aren't really doing what I drew up the assignment to be, so that's frustrating, and then leave it at that. But you looked at it from the opposite side, saying something along the lines of, like, well, it turns out this assignment isn't really testing what we thought it was.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the spirit of the game here, I think, in terms of redesigning assignments to try and drive at those essential skills, is to go look at it from, it's like, blame yourself first, or blame the assignment first before the students, because it's so easy to just kind of throw up your hands and say, well, they're not really doing it. And you said a lingering concern is that now it's a test and people don't like tests or even that word necessarily, but I would speculate that this is going to be considerably better. Just the format of a 3 to 4 page paper, students are more tempted to take their hands off the wheel and it's like, let ChatGPT write the whole thing for me, as opposed to, even if they're trying to, you know, work around it a little bit, at least you're making them go in and in a piecemeal fashion, like kind of solve this problem and solve this problem and answer this question.
Frankly, it's easier to see the similarities across as well when it's smaller, right?
Yeah.
Like when it's answering one more targeted question rather than an entire paper. You know, as you know, a lot of times students were kind of using it in part of the paper, and then you're like, what do I do? How do I assess this? And so it just feels a little bit more concrete.
Yeah, I would imagine just grading overall is going to be easier. I mean, I don't have students write papers in any of my courses, but I would imagine you end up in a place where you have to read a bunch of them, and then you end up sort of just grading them relative to each other, even if that's not, I'm saying the quiet part out loud, because you'd love to say, this is the rubric and this is what it is. ultimately you end up having to set a baseline somewhere.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I would say this seems very promising. So that was a lot of me talking without any questions, but good stuff.
You have a question in the chat as well,
Okay.
from Chuck Elliott. If AI is evident in assignment results, how do you evaluate the assignment using your rubric?
So one of the elements on the rubric is, I forget how I phrased it. I think I said authenticity. And so it is an important element on the rubric, and those essay questions, I'll assign them a failing grade if I can't identify the student's voice or any kind of authenticity or originality. However, it's part of a wider test, and so they have a chance to show their analytical skills and those other kinds of questions. But it is a course that has a pretty clear AI policy as regards to writing. It's not a tool we use for writing in this course because I'm only asking them to write paragraphs throughout the gen ed survey. And so that's on the rubric, there is a section there. And I'll probably have to sort of triage it, and, you know, as we all know, some AI writing is more original than others, or, you know, it'll probably get messy, but that's my plan right now. But I have filled AI written essay questions before, and we have a conversation about it, and I don't give it a 0, I give it a failing grade, and students usually understand, and we have a conversation about it. So I had very little pushback from students on that. I think they understand because I make my policies so clear throughout the whole semester, and we talk about it so much. And I talk about the why, right? Which is that I'm trying to develop these skills of analysis and synthesis that really can't be borrowed from anywhere else. They have to be kind of organically done yourself in order to develop them.
Thank you.
Good job. Is this the microphone for me? Okay,
Yes, I'll moderate the chat.
I'm a walker, so I'll try not to walk. Good morning, everyone. Excuse me. Thank you so much. No, you're good. Sorry, everyone online. I wanted to grab my water. Good morning. My name is Barb Jones. I'm an assistant professor here at EKU in the agriculture department. So agriculture department here is small. We are in the we're in the STEM college, and so our building is across the bypass. So I redesigned a project for swine production. It's called a Sow Watch research project, and wanted to highlight 3 essential skills. So communicate effectively, perform professionally, and collaborate and work in teams. So when we're looking at swine production, this is a small class that is taught every other year. I am a dairy scientist by training. I am not a swine specialist, but when I got to EKU, my department head had been teaching that class, and she gave it to me. Something that I found very interesting is that the dairy industry and swine industry are so similar, and so I have fallen in love with the swine industry as well. So this is a small class that is taught every year, but it's important because Kentucky is 16th in the nation in swine production. Meadowbrook Farm, for those of you that don't know, EKU has a fabulous 1,100-acre farm going out towards urban. And so we have a swine unit on there, and we actually provide pork to case dining. A lot of students and faculty don't know that. We don't provide all pork to case dining because we can't support that many students and faculty eating there, but we do provide some. And so the learning outcomes for the class were to have a good understanding of the scope and importance of the swine industry in the USA, formulating diets, because nutrition is so important when we're talking about animal agriculture. And so formulating diets to meet nutrient requirements for all of the production stages, and developing sound feeding programs, and then understand the principles of managing sows and pigs in a swine farm. Because of that last bullet point, understanding principles of management of sows and pigs, in all of our production courses, we have a we have a project, besides in dairy, where they watch whatever, the students watch whatever birthing process is going on. So if it's lambing season, they're watching lambs and they are, taking care of the lambs or taking care of the ewes. If it's the beef side, right, they're watching them calve and recording some, data for the farm to look at, birth weights, survivability, things like that. I'm going to get into a little bit of why I chose the Sow Watch in a little bit, but I'm going to talk about the essential skills. So the previous Sow Watch project had no essential skills built into it. And so I added to this time to communicate effectively, perform professionally, and collaborate and work in teams. I had been at a previous university where essential skills were not highlighted, and it was very evident in the students. And so had previously written some grants to do some youth work and also for 4-Hers, so under 18, but then also was in a service learning cohort where we were able to incorporate service learning into a class. And within service learning, essential skills are so important. And so I'd already had a little taste of what that looked like for students and how valuable that was. And so previously had that response from students to add that into a course. And so was excited to add the essential skills in here. So why did I choose the course or the assignment that I chose? I was already redesigning this this assignment when, like, I literally had to open on my computer when the call came out in emails. So originally the Sow Watch project is the students are grouped into groups. They watch the sow's farrow and record information like what is the birth order, where on the udder line is the piglet suckling from, and then they process the piglets, which is like giving them shots, giving them vitamins, identifying their number. Farrowing is such a large part of the farrow to finish operation, which is what we have out at Meadowbrook, and that is quite a few operations within Kentucky, that they needed to understand how sows farrow. But the problems with the original Sow Watch project is that there was no collaboration. They were assigned in a group, but besides just a text where they said, hey, these are the times I'm going to go watch the sow farrow, that was it. So there's no collaboration. They would work a little bit in groups when we went to process the piglets, but still it was me just saying, hey, this is what you do. And there was no critical thinking. If you are on a farm processing piglets, yes, you do not need a college degree to do that. Our students still need to know these skills, but then they also need to critically think about this. Like, what is the data, right? Like, what is their survivability? Are the piglets gaining enough weight so that they can actually go through process and eventually be processed? It was just doing manual work. And so I was pretty disappointed in the project. I don't know why I thought it would go differently when this was literally the project. It had gone well in the past. Also, our scale broke the morning that we were supposed to weigh piglets, so we didn't have any type of data, and it just literally became farm labor that the students were doing in lab. And yes, it's important that the students know that information, but if they go out and work in industry, they need to take that a step further. So, like I said, really disappointed with the spring 2024 Sow Watch project, not because of the students, just no communication, no professional discussion. And so I was like, I'm going to redesign because this is a major project for this class. So previously, from a previous university, as I had said, I added service learning to a class and really enjoyed that. The service learning was good, but I liked the essential skills that came out of that service learning project. And then here at EKU, last year added a research project in another production. So in dairy production, added a research project, and I liked the outcomes for the students. I liked the critical thinking. I liked the group collaboration. I liked the communication. I liked that they present a poster to the class as their final. So I was like, what if I add a research project to the Sow Watch? So now, yes, they're still learning how to process the piglets and do the on-farm work, but now we're going a step further and we're recording some data and talking about data manipulation and presenting posters. So I really like the employable skills that students need to know. Sometimes when we are in agriculture, we like that we're in agriculture because we can be out among the cows or the pigs by ourselves and we can be out on the farm, but that's not realistic, right? I always tell my students, they complain about group projects and I say, life is a group project. You're either married or you have cousins or brothers and sisters, and if you're in a job, you are constantly working with people. So I really think it prepares students for the real world. So I like that they always complain because I do a group project in every class. And so I asked Pork Producers Association, I sit ex officio on their board, for money for research project equipment. I didn't want our scale that we use for everything to break during this project. So asked them to fund a project. And so last spring, I discussed the feasibility of a swine research project with a swine specialist at the University of Kentucky. Their department head is a swine nutritionist. I tend to think way too broad and want to change the world with a small research project in a class. And so he kind of steered me towards something that was more feasible that the students would enjoy than what I was thinking. So I added a research project to the original Sow Watch project. So original project was watch farrowing and process piglets. We were still going to do that, but now we were going to continue that project out besides those few days of the Sow Watch project, weigh piglets weekly until weaning to evaluate. A research project question is, do the piglets gain weight more quickly on a heat pad or under a heat lamp? Piglets can't regulate their body temperature, and so they have to have some type of heat source. And so what heat source you give them can change their growth rates. And so we wanted to evaluate that. And so the research project includes data recording, simple data manipulation. I'm not having them go through SAS. We're just doing like simple means in Excel, making a poster presentation. After they were done, they would have to take an anonymous survey and then write a reflection. So the final assessment or a final assignment was to present the poster in class within your team during finals week. So on the poster, it would have the data collection of the weight gain under the different treatments. They would have to do a small literature review on the different treatments and swine in general, have the research objective, materials and methods, results, and discussion, like a normal poster would have. And then the anonymous survey would include mastery of content, willingness to learn and engage with students in the class and in their group, and then the overall impression about including research in a course at EKU, because a lot of our students, particularly in our department, have not been exposed to research and haven't been exposed to research in a course. And then they would do a project reflection that was not anonymous, and that's aspects of how well their group worked together, what they liked about the project, what they didn't like about the project, and what they would change in the future. This is the rubric. Again, I'm sure just like Martha said, it's hard to see. And so this is the rubric that myself and the other students in the room would evaluate them on. So content and specific and scientific merit is worth 60% of the grade. And then speaker style and delivery is important. So that's worth 25%. And then just the visual aid, like how well is the poster made, that's worth 15% for the final poster. So unfortunately, about 2 days before classes were supposed to start, swine production was canceled for this semester because of low enrollment. It is taught every other year. It was taught in the spring because of the heat. We have to change when classes were taught. So we moved it up a semester to be taught in fall. So we had low enrollment. So I will teach it again in fall of 2027. So what I like about the project based on my personal past experience with adding essential skills into a project and a research is that it really elaborates communication and collaboration among group members. It allows students to have that opportunity to present research posters within class. I think that's kind of a low, I can't think of the word, low pressure environment. Instead of all of a sudden you have a student project and then they go to a scientific meeting that has a couple thousand people at it and they're presenting to these really prolific scientists, that this is just low stakes, right? We're in a class, it's one assignment. And so I like that it gives them a low stakes environment to get their feet wet with presenting research posters. And then we can showcase those employable skills in a hands-on setting. So my concerns, is this enough for a large project? I tend to think about, is the data manipulation enough? I'm just doing means. From the last research project, I thought it wasn't enough. And then I realized the students in our department don't know how to use Excel, and we don't teach them how to use Excel. So maybe that's not a valid concern. Will one student do most of the work? I think that's a concern for any group project. And then am I taking too much of class time discussing Excel and poster making? I also didn't put on there, I go over like how to do a small literature search and how to read through a journal article, because most students haven't done that as well. So from past classes, the concerns that I haven't played out. It hasn't been an issue. So I would hope that in 2027, when I do this research project within the class, that my concerns will not be valid.
Right, does anybody have any questions for Barb before I ask them to share some recommendations? Yes.
Make it you.
So I was really struck by how, you said that before they were just going and watching, right? And they weren't necessarily doing much with that. That process reminded me of so many different departments here at EKU where you're required to do some kind of observation.
Yeah.
Do you think this kind of assignment that you've developed could be useful in other kind of observational settings? I'm thinking of, my students who go and observe a classroom and other settings. Do you think it could be useful?
Yes, if we take it that next step forward and have them reflect on it or think about it, apply some critical thinking. That's one of the biggest reasons why I didn't like it before was, okay, you watched them and then what? Like I personally, it was my first time teaching swine and there's a lot to cover in production classes. And so I was like, all right, great job. We got through fairing. Let's move on. And so I think if I had slowed down and done some type of reflection or critical thinking about it, then yes. And so as long as we take it the next step forward, we can.
Thanks.
Again, not really a question per se here, but you raised the concern of like, is this going to take up too much class time to explain how to analyze this in Excel and so forth? Maybe this is just me being like research centric. I teach marketing research, so I'm like, in the back of my mind, I'm going like, yeah, get them in there. I think you can justify it though by like framing it as like this is not just about this is not just about observing animals. We're gonna carry this through as an entire research project. You're gonna learn how to do a research project as well as some content specific. I don't know what the rest of their coursework looks like, but it might be a really unique aspect of this course in like relative to other classes that they take. So I don't know how deep you have to go. If you're comparing means and maybe doing some stat testing, I would say I would have a hard time giving that up as an aspect of the assignment, especially since it's like so clearly the thing that you're adding. So instead of just watching some pigs, now you're going to figure out what am I measuring, what am I evaluating to manage and optimize these processes.
Thank you. I totally agree. I was at a judging a quiz bowl event a few weeks ago, and I was talking about something that we had done in a lab, and it was very hands-on, very just like much labor, but the students enjoy what we were doing and they like to see it. Are they going to do it when they go out into a job? No, but I still want them to know how to do it. And I was actually, my old PhD advisor asked me, he was like, is that important, or should you be talking about data collection, data manipulation, data analysis, doing something else that they will be talking about or doing later on? And I was like, yes, you're right. They still need to know how to do these hands-on things, but that data manipulation and talking through and critically thinking about data and just aspects of agriculture is important. So I agree.
Yeah, it's like I say over and over again, even if you don't do anything that is research per se in your career, there's so much value in being able to be the person who can talk to the person who's talking numbers.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I'm glad you're seizing the opportunity to get that in.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I would like each of you to share some recommendations that you have learned through this redesign process for other faculty as we're about to, kick this in gear. And we're going to be asking all of the Gen Eds to integrate some essential skills into their curriculum. What did you learn from your assignment redesign that you think could help, whether it be like how you chose the assignment or something that you learned throughout the process?
I have something. Do you want me to go first? Okay, thank you. So something that I have learned, and not just through the redesign process, but it's definitely something that I know that I don't do very well. And that's being transparent of like why, like not just like students are like, is this going to be on the test, right? That's not that important, right? Like, yes, tests are important. Yes, grades are important, especially if you want to go to something like vet school, but about being more transparent of why we should be doing this, right? And so at the survey that the students take, it's open-ended. What soft skills do you think you learned from this? And I can't tell if the students, because most of them write communication, group work, I can't tell if they're truly have learned that or if they know that's just what I want to hear. So I think trying to say like why this is important and reiterating like when you go out in the real world, you are going to be working in groups. You need to communicate. You need to think about data manipulation. So I think just reiterating all of that and making sure that the students truly know why we're doing it, why it's important, and hopefully they're just not regurgitating what they think I want to hear.
I think for me, it was just kind of clarifying the purpose of the assignment for myself, because I don't know if this is applicable across multiple departments, but every so often there is an assignment that you've kind of inherited that you need to do, not just for your students' learning outcomes, but also for these other metrics like assessment, et cetera. So for me, it was really helpful to meet with my colleagues in assessment. We have a wonderful assessment czar and ask her what are we actually trying to do here and what do we need from this assignment, and kind of starting there. And then if you're like me and you've come at this through, a degree in your discipline and not in education, some of the language, like what analysis means or synthesis means, I needed some explanation of what we actually meant by that, because I needed to tie that to something that makes sense to me, like that archival process, because the term itself doesn't have that great meaning to me. So I guess clarifying what the skill actually is for myself and doing that with people who are more used to using that language was really helpful. And I think will make it easier for me to make that transparent to students too, because I have it clarified for myself what I'm actually wanting them to get out of this. I think I of course knew what skills I was teaching in the class, but being able to kind of clarify what this assignment was doing was really important to me.
All right, I have another question. So we know that, CPE is going to require us to assess all of the 10 essential skills through general education. And different courses, different elements are going to be assigned different skills. So the skill that your area might be assigned might be different than the one that you've already integrated into an assignment. But do you think this process has helped you be prepared for what that will look like whenever you have to make another adjustments, whether it be again to like this one, like for yours, maybe if you're using like use information for decision making, right? Like you could, I think, tweak some things and change a little bit of what that purpose looks like. But do you think this process has helped you, and then you could even like help other people within your areas to help with these redesigns?
I can go if that's okay. Yes. So like I said, like the assignment was literally open on my laptop when the email came through. I was telling Martha, my favorite time to teach a course is the third time I've taught it. Because maybe the content didn't change, but things like, okay, I was really disappointed with SalWatch the first time. So now I get to go back and redesign it. And sometimes I think when we are teaching 4 or 5 classes and we have 4 labs with that, it's a lot to say like, oh, I need to go back and redesign that. And this showed me that, okay, number one, the university like wants you to do that. They do care about that. What's good for the students. And I tend to be personally like a bull in a china shop where I just like push through. And so the redesign process made me stop and think like, what actually am I doing here? Like, what do I want the students to come get out of this? I think personally, like we have learning outcomes for the whole class, but do I have learning outcomes for every part of the class? And so this really made me stop and think like, what can the students actually get out of this that will help them later in life? And so I think the redesign process has made me think about that for designing some other projects for other classes. And so it just kind of made me stop and think about it a little bit more and what's helpful for the students.
I think so. I mean, if we were to be assigned group work, right, then working in teams, then I would be back to the drawing board, I guess, for online asynchronous. So that would be a real challenge. But I mean, I think the essentials, we already are teaching essential skills, and we already are making those explicit to students through the learning outcomes if they're well written. So I think this was a useful process of kind of repackaging those learning outcomes, right? Because this assignment was already tied to the learning outcomes. I just needed to strengthen that in a way. And then also, we don't articulate those learning outcomes like one of those bullet points from the essential skills. So kind of using some different language. But yes, I think this basic process, depending on what skill this I did use a gen ed course. So if it were to choose a different one, then I would probably have to retool it a little bit. But I think hopefully from looking at our learning outcomes, we'll be with a skill that's similar enough that I don't think it would have to be a huge leap to do that.
Right. Does anybody else have any questions?
Looks like we are clear on Zoom.
All right. Well, one thing, thank you guys so much. I think that was absolutely wonderful and very useful information. We are going to be offering a lot of professional development in the spring. We're working on what that looks like now. So just look out for information for these trainings and the additional PD that we're going to be offering. We'll be doing it on the different skills. We'll be doing it focusing some on backward design and tilt and a multitude of different things that through the different forums and work groups that faculty have indicated would really help them through these redesign processes. So please know that we are here to help you through this process. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. But thank you all so much. I think this was fantastic.
Thank you.